Hello again, everyone. My name is Michael Schachter. I'm a product marketing director at Allot, and I'd like to welcome you to this cyber threat report that we do a couple times a year. This one is titled Keeping Subscribers Safe in 2023, since we're still in Q1, and it's our Q1 cyber threat report that is going to review the findings from around the world, from what we saw at the CSP customers who have installed our systems and all of the cyber threats that we've been able to block on their behalf for their end user subscribers and small medium business customers. So as I said, I'm Michael Schachter, Director of Product Marketing, and I'm very excited today to be hosting the webinar along with my colleague from Allot, David El Maleh, who is our Vice President of Cyber Products and a cyber expert at that. And we have a special guest also, David Newman. So it's David E and David N. And David Newman is a senior analyst at Tag Cyber over in the United States. And he will be adding sort of a North American perspective and maybe a wider industry perspective as we go through the data. David E, my colleague and our Vice President of Products, will present the main findings of this cyber threat report. And this, again, as I said, is based on what we have detected and protected for the end users of our CSP, ISP customers. It's important to note at the outset that it's based on a representative sampling of anonymous data from the CSP customers who chose and are willing to share data. So it's representative, it's statistically accurate, but it's not all of the data from all of our installations. And as I said, our guest, David N, will present his perspective on these findings as we present them to you, and more general his insights on what's going on in the world, what the threats are today, and what they look like they're going to be tomorrow, and how CSPs can relate to this topic. David N also has a very rich background in cybersecurity, and so we're looking forward especially to hearing his insights. And having said this, I think this session should be very interesting to all of you because most of you run networks on behalf of your customers, or you sell to companies that run networks. And we think it will be indeed very, very timely and pertinent. So here's what we all look like. And before we jump into the details and the data and the whole cyber threat landscape, we also want to add that we think that you have a business opportunity as well as a taking care of your customers opportunity, and we'll touch on that as well. Some quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded, so you're more than invited to share the link that we'll be sending you with colleagues who weren't able to attend, and to, of course, come back and listen to it again. We will send you a link also to this webinar, as well as the full cyber threat report that this webinar is sort of presenting highlights and a sample from that full report. We do invite comments and questions, so please use the Q&A box, not the chat window, the Q&A box that's in the Zoom toolbar. If you think of any questions, we'll try to catch them as they come in, but more likely at the end. I think we'll have some time at the end to address them, and if not, we'll get back to you offline. There will be a few poll questions during the webinar where we try to ask you some questions to get to know you a little bit better, and also to get some data points kind of to compare to what we saw out in the field. And in fact, just before we get started, I would like to ask a couple of questions so that we understand who our audience is today. So here's the first question, and it's my typical first question for those of you who've been on before. This webinar, excuse me, is targeted at service providers, CSPs, ISPs, but some of you may work for other kinds of organizations. So do you work for a fixed CSP? Do you work for a mobile or a converged operator, or for an enterprise that sells into operators, or for something else altogether? So you should see the poll question up on your Zoom screen, and it will be helpful if we can get some answers from you. Fixed, mobile, converged is the options that we have for CSPs. CSPs, we use that term for communication service providers, or ISPs, internet service providers. So let's wait a couple minutes and try to get some more of you to answer out there. Some of you, I guess, are bashful, but please don't worry, it's all anonymous and it just gives us a sense of who's online. Give it another couple of seconds. And thank you very much. So I will share the results with you. Okay, so as of now, the service providers who are online are mostly converged, and we've got some enterprises selling into the CSPs and some other kinds of organizations, which I'm going to assume are service providers, and I didn't nail exactly your type. Let me ask a follow-up question, and that is, hold on a second. The follow-up question is, within the service provider organization that you work for, or the organization in general that you work for, what kind of role do you have? Are you in engineering, in networking, more in a marketing or an operations role? Do you deal directly with security, or did I not come up with enough options in this question as well? So again, if you could take a second to fill this in, that would be great. Okay, give you 2 more seconds, and let's see what we've got today. So a third of you are in engineering, 22% in marketing and in operations, also 22%, 11% in security, and others. Well, we think and we trust that it'll be interesting for all of you, regardless of your role, but thank you for letting us know who you are. And now we are going to jump into the report. So the first thing I want to share with you is some sort of interesting trends that we saw based on the overall data picture that we'll be diving into. The first thing is something that was a little bit curious, but we dug a little bit deeper. It looks like phishing attacks were going down during the year. We don't think that's really what happened. We think that some very active phishing sites were kind of inflating some of the numbers early on, and there was also dropping off of COVID-related phishing as that became less of a draw. But those were quickly replaced with things like Bitcoin Trojans and other kinds of, credential stealing. So phishing is certainly a prevalent issue going forward. As I mentioned, the surge in Bitcoin trading that grew. Bitcoin kind of also had some ups and downs during the year. I think when the market kind of crashed earlier in the year, that became less compelling as a malicious attack vector, and so the bad actors were trying out other things. But then, as the market sort of rebounded and people were coming in at the lower prices, we saw a strong surge in that later in the year. We also saw a lot of kind of region-dependent, but a lot of online dating kind of fake sites where people were obviously giving some of their credentials to be, verified to get onto these sites, and they kind of looked like, other popular sites, and so that was risky. And also gambling sites grew during the year, which might indicate, I don't know, economic uncertainty and people looking to supplement their incomes, let's say. Not surprisingly, throughout the year, there was a growth in Russia-related malicious URLs in all of the different databases that we get feeds from. And this was across all of the different categories as well. And presumably this is, driven by geopolitical activities going on. The Hydra banking Trojan was particularly strong in Spanish-speaking countries. Not sure why. Banking Trojans in general went up during the year, up and down, but mostly up at the end. And in general, you'll see that we saw a lot of what we call cat and mouse patterns. That is to say, there would be a quarter with a high rate and then a quarter with a low rate of a particular category. And we saw that in most of the categories, not all of them. And that just seems to be this ongoing battle between the defenders and protectors and the bad guys who are out to get us all. So something gets defended and blocked, and it takes them a while, and then they switch to something else, and then another thing goes up, and the defenders catch on, it goes down, and so on. So we did see a lot of that as well. And now let's kind of go into the details. And this might be the point to mention that the solution that is collecting all of this data from our CSPs who are blocking with our software is called a lot secure. And this is not a hard sell presentation, but we will mention a little bit about it during the course of it. So David E, we'll go over to you at this point.
Hey, Michael, could I just add something real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Highlights there. One of the things that jumps out at me is that for the attackers, these are not high cost activities, but they are prolific, right? And so with this much effort and sophistication, they can achieve this much impact. And I think that's what your platform is really looking to do, is saying, this is such a prolific data set, and there's so much of that going on across your spectrum that you need something that can really engage these kinds of threats at scale. And I'm excited about the webinar today, because I think that the data that you collect is so rich and gives us so many different insights, regardless of who your consumer is. So sorry to interrupt, but I just thought I kind of wanted to throw that out there, that these threats are still relatively low cost for adversaries, but they're prolific and high impact for victims.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. So David L. Mallet, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. So I think it was a very good segue from the other David, the mirror David. So thank you very much. And I fully agree. In fact, this is important to mention that the data is coming from our solution, which is called Not Secure, and protects subscribers and SMB across the globe who are our communication service provider partners. We have a huge data available, a huge number of subscribers which are today protected, more than 20 million. So it is in fact a very nice, I would say, data feed that we can provide and understand, some cyber threat landscape that we want to share with you. So one thing that I would like to mention as well as part of the solution, it's a solution which is zero touch, meaning that there is nothing practically to install for the consumers or the SMBs. It is built into the network of the CSP, and it blocks threats before they are in fact even reaching the subscriber. So in terms of security, this is something very comprehensive and very simple again to implement. Now, looking at some numbers, let's start with I would say one number for the year 2022, where we stopped more than 11 billion cyber threats from the subscriber base, protected by our platform. So this is really huge. And now we're going to drill down into these numbers a little bit more. So over to the next slides, Michael.
Yeah, and let me just add, I mentioned it before, but the 11.3 billion, which is a huge number, again, is only a sample of our total number, because not all the CSPs are comfortable sharing it, even though it's completely anonymous data. So you could probably extrapolate and even double that if you wanted to. So
Definitely.
Let's move on. Yeah.
All right. So looking at the overall number, what we can see is it will be, I would say, something, as we are a little bit aware of what's going on the cybersecurity landscape, which is not really surprising, but it is important still to understand the magnitude of the evolution of the cyber threat landscape, where we have more than 50% rise about the number of attempts and threats blocked year over year. So this is something very, very important. This is something that we also expect to continue to rise. Again, the threat landscape is only increasing. More threats are coming. The technologies are increasing. In fact, the attack surface with now 5G ramping up quite seriously, and 5G standalone as well. So it's something that is definitely expected to rise. And here we wanted really to give that perspective with a huge number of growth for 2022.
Yeah, and if I might just tie back to what the other David mentioned, which is the ability to scale the solution, that's something really only the CSP can do, because they're sitting on the pipe, in the pipe, And so they can, if they have a solution that's in the network, basically protect a virtually unlimited number of customers, as opposed to, you know, endpoint solutions that depends on every individual customer installing it on all of their devices and maintaining it and configuring it and updating it and so on. So the threat landscape and the number of attacks, you know, is just growing, and it's going to get worse. It's easy to, you know, to launch attacks, to rent attacks even, and so it really is a growing threat. Okay, so let's drill down, as I said, a bit more into the numbers. So we saw the growth. Now let's have a look at specific categories. So we can see the Adware category, which has the trend of, I would say, ramping up during Q2 and then going down a little bit in Q3 and then strongly ramping up in Q4. So as you're familiar, you know, Adware is a form of malware that it can be difficult to spot. I would say it's even harder to get rid of. It's on the device. It's usually without the user knowledge. It's quite, I would say, invading, in fact, in terms of Adware. And what we see really that we had trends related to specific dominant Adware, such as Omni Tor, and Zero Max as well, which were in this case Browser Hijacks. They were all detected, of course, and blocked by our solution in real time. And again, you know, Adware sounds like, okay, it's an annoyance. I don't want to read these ads, but, you know, I don't have to look at them. But that's only the surface problem, because as David says, they hide these other attacks, and they can, you know, direct you to fake sites. They're not just trying to grab, you know, the commercial value of your clicks. They can often be highly damaging, including things like opening you up to ransomware and so on. So it's not a non-issue.
Michael, you had asked me to maybe share a perspective from this side of the planet, so to speak. But, you know, I don't think many folks realize that the backbone of the economy in the United States is the small to medium-sized business. And those constituents are things like doctors' offices, garages. They're the things that make our lives better every day, and we want them to be really, really good at them. They cannot be good at all these things. That's why they have companies like yours and experts to advise them. But the CSPs that are providing connectivity and technology support to those SMBs are absolutely critical to their overall business success. And I think of the kinds of threats that you guys are all tracking on, and, you know, they're not immune to them. My wife's neurologist is the best neurologist that we've ever had in 30 years. But she's horrible at the technology, quite frankly. And the data and the systems that she uses are absolutely critical to my wife's well-being. So I give that as an example, but think about your day-to-day life. If you work with a CSP, think about the services and capabilities that they provide to their constituents, and are they adequately providing that level of protection that allows the SMB markets especially to be really good at what they are in business to do, and serve their customers, as opposed to worrying about these threats day in and day out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've seen and shared, and you can see this on our website, we've done surveys worldwide of SMBs, and they are not cyber experts, and they don't want to be, and they shouldn't have to be. So absolutely, confirms your point there.
All right, so let's continue with more trends related to additional classifications of threat. We can see similar trends as what we saw for on the Adware. We can also, you know, understand, you know, the rise in Q2 also corresponds, you know, with the beginning of, I would say, the geopolitical situations in Europe with Russia as well. So we can also understand, and we also see, you know, threats coming up from these specific geolocations as well. So that can explain the rise. And we are going now to drill down, I would say, on the different categories. We have spyware, phishing, malicious downloads, hackers categories, and malware. So They all present, I would say, rather the same have the same trends, but we are going now to drill down and to see, how it presents the specific threats for the consumers and for the SMBs as well. Michael, do you want to add something?
Yeah, again, I just want to say that, that up and down trend, as I mentioned at the beginning, and we're going to be seeing that, and here it is again on the next slide, some of that reflects, a lot of that reflects this cat and mouse game. It happened to divide well into quarters this past year, where, particularly active malicious sites were gradually recognized by the defense industry, as it were, and taken down or efficiently blocked. And so it took a little time. You can see here in Q3, there was apparently a big scramble and then a big jump in Q4. So it's this ongoing problem. And so you really need this automated zero-touch kind of solution that David alluded to.
All right, so let's now look at command and control attacks. If you are familiar with command and control, it's basically, first of all, say infecting devices, and then being able to have them communicating with a command and control server or center in order to control these devices, use them as botnets to launch, for example, distributed denial of service attacks, or even infecting further the devices or spread infections. So this is quite sophisticated attacks and quite problematic attacks. And to go back to what you said, Michael, about the cat and mouse game, I think here this is very interesting, because if we look at the trend for this year, we can see that, first of all, the numbers are quite huge in terms of common attacks. It means that, devices currently are in fact infected already and trying to communicate with this kind of command and control servers, and this is something that we are blocking. While in fact the device has been infected, it is still protected because we are blocking this communication and preventing them to further spread infections or launch those attacks, etc., as we say. But what we observed as well, and you could see by the way probably in the news, that in Q3 we had some kind, I would say, quite a huge takedowns of CNC servers across the globe. I would say especially in Europe and in fact, mainly in Europe, we had a lot of Europe, including Russia as well, of CNCs being taken down. And this reflects, in fact, the number which is dropping very, very significantly between Q2 and Q3, because these servers being taken down. But what is interesting to see is the way it can recover. It recovers very rapidly, and you can see that already in Q4, although there were a lot of campaigns in order to shut down all these servers, thanks to the local authorities and cybercrime organizations to fight against these servers. We can see that really it ramped up very, very rapidly already in Q4. So this is something that is quite an important threat and quite important to be again protected against. And here I would say the importance is not only to be blocked, to be protected when there is, I would say, the beginning of the infection, trying basically to infect the different devices, but also, and in many cases it's already the case, as you can see here, devices have been already infected, computers, IoT devices, etc. It is always important to be still able to protect, and this is what we can see here. So, Michael.
Yeah, it's a big problem. And I think it's very likely that as 5G proliferates and more IoT devices are out there in the home, but things like the smart city, the smart grid, smart parking lots, vending machines, everything, there's going to be an even wider threat landscape of devices that have, by definition, low to no security capabilities. You can't even put an endpoint on IoT devices if you wanted to and had the time to, let alone configure them and so on. They just can't accommodate it. And so there's going to be, exponentially more devices that CNCs can be attacking and taking over. And that can, as David mentioned, launch, these botnet attacks, but it can also just knock out things that you need, your home security, your local water company, electric grid, all of these, device dependent industries are going to be at risk if the the critical infrastructure of our lives needs to be protected, closer to the source, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think David's point that, this is not, there's no end game here, right? I mean, you're going to see these ebbs and flows as adversaries evolves, Michael, as you alluded to, that technology changes, new technology emerges. So it's not something that has a definitive beginning and a definitive end. The other thing that I know we have some security engineers and some security professionals that have joined us today. I was in the Air Force, United States Air Force for 28 years. I was a cyber warfare officer. This level of intelligence really in this particular category is extremely valuable, right? It really helps you understand potential future patterns and gives you a little bit of the taxonomy of what actors are doing. And to David E's point, like what they're connecting with on those other threat scales that informs how you yourself and your own organizations may be implementing technology changes or change release or technology transformation. So gives you an idea so you can be a great business partner to be able to say, hey, we need to think about these kinds of threats when we're adopting new technology or making change to our service delivery.
Okay, absolutely. Let's move on. And another category, David, you want to take us through the hacker category?
Yeah, sure. And thank you, really, David, and for adding these details. That was, I think, very relevant as well. And to move with a hacker category. So here we classify, I would say, mostly things related to port scan activities. So that's again a technique about scanning open ports in order to establish communication with devices, in order again to infect these devices, control them, etc. It's a technique which is very well known. It's one of the first steps again to perform attacks towards devices. The idea here is to block this kind of port scans seamlessly for the consumers, for the SMBs, etc., in order to prevent such, I would say, flows into the security to be exploited by the attacker. So this is done again on the network level from the CSP for the consumers and the SMB. So without the need to I would say configure or do any kind of configuration on their devices. What is also very relevant to see is the number again of these threads which were blocked, which is more than almost 19 million of blocks, with again an increase around the Q4, which almost doubled. So it's the trends are always about going back again and trying again for the hackers. This is not an ending game, as David was mentioning.
Yeah, and a couple of things to, I think, reiterate here is this one, unlike the other ones, is more directly and clearly a threat, right? Nobody's port scanning or brute forcing, just for fun. Whereas you could say maybe some of the adwares are just, annoying, or even, we'll talk about it, but even like crypto mining, they're using your resources, let's say, but maybe they're not really harming you. But this is clearly trying to harm you. And this one actually continued to go up during the year. So it didn't even have the up and down. They're constantly trying, and they're constantly trying new attempts. And surprisingly, it's even against personal devices, where that's a problem. But of course, the SMB backbone of the world economy that David N spoke of is particularly at risk here, because it's not just locking up your phone, which you can throw out and start over in the worst case, if they don't actually get any of your credentials, which they can, of course, but getting into your SMB network, and moving laterally across the network into multiple devices, more often than not can actually shut down the SMB business. So this is a really important one to block at scale.
Yeah, David, we've talked typically about our constituents as human beings, but the reality is across the world, we have over 8 billion devices now that are interconnected. My own house is an example. I recently had a solar system put in, and I have these these large battery systems. And so good news, I don't have to pay an electric bill anymore. More good news, I have greater resiliency. Bad news, I have no idea, and I do this for a living, how these things are getting updated or what they're susceptible to. What was really interesting for me is the engineers that were installing it, and they said, hey, we need your Wi-Fi password. I was like, why would you need my Wi-Fi password? Well, it's how we're going to connect. We're going to connect to this to do software updates and those kinds of things. So we're seeing like the environmental kind of changes that are happening. We're seeing things like power production moving to the edge as well. Think about consumers who have medical devices in their house. Think about consumers that have vehicles that are getting software updates or for semi-autonomous driving. All those things are really kind of probably the next generation of exploitation that are already happening, quite frankly. What's your perspective on that?
I mean, I think our perspective as a company is that just, re-emphasizes the need to block this stuff closer to the source in the network and not depend on people, kind of rolling that rock up the hill, because you just can't protect all these devices, and we're becoming more and more dependent. And like you said, the critical infrastructure is not only the national grid that hopefully somebody with more resources is taking care of. The critical infrastructure is, your power grid in your house, in your home, or your, medical devices, or your even things like your air conditioning and your smart doorbell and your certainly your smart car. We cannot live in that world if that world is being exploited. And so the only realistic way to protect that critical infrastructure, as we see it as a company, is in the network before it reaches those devices.
I'm really not sure why my dishwasher needs to be connected to the internet, especially when my wife tells me, I already have you connected to the dishes, so why do we have to connect to the dishwasher? But the reality is that whether we want these appliances and devices to be connected or not, they are. Right. And another quick example, when I had my air conditioning system replaced a couple of years ago, the technician said, do you want me to configure your thermostat for Wi-Fi connectivity? I was like, no, I don't want you to do that, right? So just as a general paranoia, I connect as least as possible to it. He said, good answer. If you read in the terms and conditions of the manufacturer of the thermostat in conjunction with the service provider, if I did enable that, I implicitly agreed to having my my thermostat remotely adjusted. That was really intriguing, right? And so if the utility company can do it, you can darn well bet that probably somebody that I don't want adjusting it can do the very same thing. And
90 whatever % of the population is nowhere as cyber astute, and therefore will say, sure, why not? It sounds like a good thing. I can set my air conditioner on my way home from work, and so can somebody else. So yeah, absolutely.
I think, Michael, just to add on that, and I think also that's a good transition to this point, is the common ground to all the things that we discussed so far, around the dishwasher and the cars, etc., is that they all connect. As you said, David, they are all connected. In order to connect, they all go to the network of the CSP. So this is the first point, the first touch point where they get connectivity, to the network, whether they're using direct SIM connectivity or they use Wi-Fi, but the Wi-Fi then connects again to the CSP. So this is where, in fact, the first touch point can happen, and then where they can get, I would say, very simple way to be protected. Because to protect a dishwasher is quite difficult. If you look at the device itself, it's quite, I would say, all the things which are, for smart homes or even in the industrial IoT, etc. They are, built for purpose in the sense that the dishwasher has to clean, the dishes. That's what it needs to do. It doesn't need to now be based on AI in order to protect from threats. That's not his objective. So that's why here it's very important to have a layer of protection for these devices in order to make sure that even when they are when they are connected. And in any case, I do agree with what you say, David. But many of the users Michael mentioned, they just don't know when they will let this device connect, etc. So they are in fact increasing their own attack surface, and it is very important to make sure that they can still be protected. And that's why again the touch point with a CSP network can be a very good solution for that. And here, for what in fact we are describing is exactly this scenario where we have in fact the smart home and where we have different devices connected. I would say to the internet. They can be connected from the home gateway, the home router, or they can be connected over Wi-Fi. In any case, there are touch points where they can be secured. We have in fact a solution which is quite comprehensive. Again, wherever the user connects a device directly, his mobile phone through a SIM-based service, he is protected. If he connects at home on the Wi-Fi, we have also a solution called Home and Business Secure, which is in fact a tiny agent running on the gateway itself. So nothing to install on the device, on the computer, etc. And the agent will enforce the security directly for all the communication going outside, but also inside, so inbound and outbound communication, but also lateral movements between the devices. So we talked about previously about the port scans, etc. Port scans can happen when a device is infected. In fact, it can start also to scan the internal network, as you might be familiar with. So this is something also very important, because once the infection is in, it can spread. So remember that we can always get devices which have been already infected joining the network, and then can start to try to spread again the infections and the malware, the spyware, or trying to communicate again with a command and control servers. So it's very important to have this communication, which is lateral movements, also being prevented. And that's something that we can also do with this kind of solutions on the home gateway.
Okay.
Anything to add, Michael? I spoke a lot. I'm sorry.
No, that was fine. And yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, the CPE, the router, the home or business router, is kind of the end of the CSP network at the user premises. And so it is still taking this approach of in the network before reaching the device, adding that layer of security. And again, the ability to scale to virtually unlimited numbers of homes and customers. So a very important, I think, approach for the coming world.
All right, so let's move with another category that we saw at the summary of the crypto threats, which are related again to either, I would say, crypto mining, so installing basically tiny software which are going to run some scripts in order to basically use the infected device in order to mine some cryptos. And this is something which is, I would say, at the minimum, quite invasive for the device, because it's basically using some resources on the device like CPU and GPU, and it's something which is in that case, as I said, invasive. But we have also phishings which are related to cryptos, also which are in this category, and where we can see the attackers try to get credentials from the crypto wallets of the users, and then of course this is even more I would say harming for these users, because they are losing their money on the crypto side. We can see that in Q3 there is a drop. I believe that this is related, as we saw last year. There was a kind of I would not say the major crash, but there was a significant crash of the crypto currencies with Ethereum, etc. So the interest is basically ramping down. You can see the trend. Also see the attackers are less interested. Remember that attackers and hackers are motivated, I would say in many cases, by money. So this is something where the interest drops, we can see a drop. when it comes back again, we can see the rise again of this kind of attacks.
Yeah, in a number of the regional markets, we saw some very popular and I guess sophisticated kind of human engineering sites, which were, very close copies of legitimate crypto platforms, if you will. And they would get people to, log in and sign up. And they would, I mean, they're very devious. They would even give you a month or two of profits to get you, more fully invested, and then to ask for additional credentials or whatever. And then they would start taking all of your wallet and emptying it into their wallets, and pretty much untraceable. And it's a huge problem around the world.
And concluding with the categories with spyware, again, here we see similar trends. Spyware, would say, kind of very problematic for personal information. They can collect sensitive data, passwords, financial information, and at the minimum, I would say, browsing habits, history, etc. So this is something that is really, really common as well, and it has to be again protected for the users, because at the least, it's something that is going to still, I would say, browsing history. Afterward, it can be much more significant for the attackers. We saw as well significant ones like freehandshipmail.com. In fact, was a very important spyware across 2022. And again, this is very important to protect the users from being targeted by these spywares.
So I'm going to throw another poll at everybody. And I'd like you to take a look at this. I'm just curious, after hearing, what we've described and what we've seen, but without all the numbers in front of you, what do you feel, or what have you experienced? What is your understanding? Which type of cyber threats do your customers experience the most? And we're asking for one answer here. So is it phishing attacks? Is it viruses? Hacking into their networks? Are people getting hit with spyware, adware? So if you could all just take a second or two to dive into this, that would be great. There are no wrong answers. This is what you think is happening in your networks or in your world or your friends or what you've experienced. I'll give it a couple more seconds. If anybody else would like to chime in, now's the time. Okay, last call. All right, let's see what we've got. Interesting. People do not think that spyware is out there. And in fact, in our numbers, it was low, but devastating in its, in its impact. And phishing does seem to be quite big out there. We did see that, in fact, adware is a huge phenomenon, but again, not all of adware is really directly malicious. So I think this is a pretty representative sample. David N., what do you see in your markets, and what are you worried about out there in North America?
We see these things as campaigns. Phishing is still probably 54 to 60% successful with respect to an attack vector. The reason that is probably so successful for the adversary is, one, it's easy to form, it's doing those things, but number two, it's becoming increasingly sophisticated. And it ties probably closer to adware exploits as well as what we're seeing on our side. So a campaign that, like, for instance, adware pops up and says, hey, this is such and such. This is Microsoft is the most recent one. This is Microsoft. We've detected a virus on your computer. Please call this number. And people are being exploited through social engineering. So we're seeing these things intertwine, but the scalability of the threats and then the sophistication is really what gets people into some difficulty. Because if you're this is tax season here in the United States. So we're seeing a lot of phishing attacks that talk about, people's taxes, especially if, over the last couple of years, some tax profiles have been hijacked. So they're telling people like, hey, click here to see what's going on here in this space. So those kinds of things are really exploiting human weaknesses as well as technology weaknesses. So we can just stop them getting there. That's half the battle. But the reality is a lot of them are still getting through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we touch on that in the full report, how much of this has to do with, like you said, human engineering and our susceptibility to appeals that seem worthwhile, innocent, and genuine, and they're not. And lest you think that that it's the same old attacks and we've seen them all. That's just not the case, right? Here's kind of the data. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, of course. So here, I just wanted also to highlight on the graph because it might be confusing. The graph is the sideways. So we saw the trends, but it goes up in Q2, goes down in Q3, and
yeah,
goes back
sorry
in
about
Q4.
that.
So just wanted for the audience that there is a sideways. So it is still the same trend. We see also the same trend.
And it's going up as the year ends, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So and in terms of threats here, we are talking about unique threats. So different threats coming up. So what that means is basically, the cyber security landscape, the cyber crime is reinventing itself every day. Honestly, there is only new and new threats coming up. So it's not the solution needs to be very dynamic in terms of a classification of, for example, threat intelligence, etc. Something that is also part of our solution. We protect on the network, but we also identify, of course, with a huge threat intelligence database, which is comprised of very comprehensive sources. And we have a cyber threat team also working on the database, which means that we always consistently monitor, and we are able also to adjust in order to make sure that these threats are, although this is very dynamic, but they are again protected and blocked seamlessly for the consumers from our partner CSPs.
Okay, so this picture might look a little bit strange in this presentation, but I want to put in another plug for what we call at Allot network native cybersecurity. And this is really our message to you, the CSPs out there and the ISPs and the companies that sell into that space. You guys own the pipes and you own the customer relationship, and you're perfectly situated to keep the data clean, just like the water company keeps the water purified, just like the electric company, flattens out surges and so on. You're there, and you can do the job, and you can do it much better than your SMB customers who depend on connectivity for their businesses, and you can do it much better than the end users, the David and Michaels of the world, who even though we're more knowledgeable and more technologically adept, we probably don't take care of our own systems the way we should. And there are just too many things out there that can't be protected by individual endpoint activity. So you can keep that pipe clean, and you can keep your customer happy, and go for it. Here's one last quick poll question. Having heard that advertisement, but we'd still like to have your take on how should you guys address cybersecurity. Maybe you still believe that third-party endpoint downloads are the way to go, and many service providers around the world offer endpoint downloads from their network, from their customer portals, and so on. The subscribers, leave it to them. It's their issue. It's their devices. It's their houses. It's their businesses. They can go out and secure themselves, or you can offer something optional that can be an add-on that can be paid for, or it can be built in, and the price can kind of be hidden within the broadband connectivity, but it should always be there by default. So if a few more of you could chime in here, it would be very interesting to hear your take on this. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds. And we will end the poll and show you the results. So the good news is, I think we've convinced you that offering third-party solutions is not the way to go. Leaving it to the subscribers to handle, offering it as an option, or delivering it built in by default. So it's an interesting range. I'm going to ask David E. to say a word about our option or built-in by default solution, because we think it is, we know it is fairly unique in the industry, and it does have that pervasive, all-encompassing approach. So David, you want to give it a few minutes of overview?
Yeah, of course, Michael. Just briefly, because I see that we're almost, at the time. So about the solution, as we explained, this is something which is very comprehensive. It serves, I would say, customers, regardless if they are on the CSP network or off-net, for example, connected to public Wi-Fi, etc. On the network, we have a very wide range of solutions covering consumers and SMBs. In the office or at home with Home Secure or Business Secure, for specifically for IoT device with IoT Secure, and Network Secure and DNS Secure, network-based security, which are protecting, as we said, seamlessly the customers from different threats. All of these are managed with our unified management layer for the CSP, where the CSP can define the configuration, provisioning, and manage completely the solution end to end, but also the consumers as well as the SMBs, so the end users, have a possibility to define their own security policy or parental control. If we talk about Home Secure, for example, or Business Secure, where Home Secure, where we can have control about the device activity, etc. So this is something I would say quite unique, where it's not only, I would say, just a blanket security with a one policy for everyone. It's something where everybody can be protected, but also define the different policies and have a control about, the different categories that needs to be blocked, etc. For example.
Okay. So what I'd like to say is the following. It's getting quite late. I will run through just a couple of bullets here. We've done a lot of research over the last couple of years using an international company called Coleman Parks, and they do it completely anonymous. We've interviewed consumers, we've interviewed CSPs, we've interviewed SMBs. Everyone's aware of the threats out there, okay? Everybody said it's important to be protected, virtually everybody, right? But what we found is that being cyber aware does not mean being cyber secure. The majority of people that we, and the last couple months ago, 7,000, 8,000 people around the world, they weren't sure if their smartphones had security on them. There's a growing expectation that the CSP needs to step up and that the connectivity should be secure and bundled in by default, or at least as an option, like we saw in the poll answers. And this is, I think, for your ears, they value it and they're willing to put money on it, $3, $4, $5, $6 a month around the world. We saw that, they're willing to pay on the month, every month, as an add-on to their, monthly fees to be assured of security. So I think that's a huge data point for you guys. If you look in the chat window right now, we just put the link up for the full report. We will be also sending it to you, but if you want to copy it, you can access the report already and not wait for it. And so finally, to summarize, because we are just about out of time, the first one is, well, yeah, of course, everybody knows that, but this is real data showing it. The cyber threats are growing and they're changing all the time, and it's really hard to keep up with it. And so your customers really need a zero-touch protection that's always up to date, and they want it and they will pay for it. And we saw that in our surveys. We have an offering that gives robust cybersecurity anytime, anywhere they're on your network, and with an off-net option as well. But the main thing here is it's that effortless zero touch. You sign up for it and you're protected through the network because your network is synced with our online security and our up-to-date and constantly updated database of security threat feeds. And so no work for the subscriber. The full report is available. And if you want more, more information about our solutions, you can click here. You can't click here now, but you'll have access to the to this webinar. So thank you very much for spending this time with us. We didn't have time for Q&A, but we will try to get back to you. As if you ask questions, you can send them to us. You can go onto our website. You can ask to be contacted to hear about our solutions, to talk to experts, to see demos, and so on. So, you know, bottom line, it's dangerous out there, and it's just getting more dangerous all the time. There are more bad actors. There are more connected devices. They're not protected. They're not protectable on board by themselves. You guys, the CSPs and ISPs of the world, can protect your customers, and we're here to help you do that. So thank you again. Thank you, David E, and thank you, David N. A lot of very interesting data out there for you. Have a good day, stay safe, and looking forward to seeing you at our next cyber webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Stay well, everyone.
Thank you.